Hi everyone, and welcome to the second part of making these Cyberpunk stays. In the previous part we started a good bit on it, but this time we are going to start with the interesting bits. To reiterate, we are going to make a pair of Cyberpunk stays, but for this we will be using a historical pattern from Patterns of Fashion 5. And I guess I don't have much more recapping to do, so without further ado, let's start sewing. This is where we left off after the previous part. The only thing I did in the meanwhile is to remove all of the basing threads on the side seams that we sewed together. And it's immediately time for an interesting part, because I got my EL wire. I already soldered it together as well, and it works. So now we can immediately start sewing in all of the boning channels which we will run the EL wire through. However, before I start sewing these boning channels, I need to know how wide they should be. So I grabbed a spare piece of mesh and a spare piece of fabric, which I can now sew together with boning channels in various widths to see if we can actually run the EL wire through it. And there we go, one cording channel of 4mm wide and one cording channel of 5mm wide. And I already tried it. I think the 4mm is definitely going to be too small. I really can't even get it in there. And the 5mm is sort of doable. Except that I really need to make sure that if I push this in, it's not gonna double up. Because if the EL wire doubles up in a too harsh of an angle, it will break. I might be able to get it in here in a channel of 5mm, but I might also just go for 6. But at least I know this works. So that means that we can start the mammoth task of actually sewing in all of these cording channels on the actual stays. That will take a while. To actually determine where the EL wire channels have to end up, I grabbed the mock-up on which I had drawn them out, and with a bit of measuring and guessing, copied them onto the actual stays. Besides the boning channels on the panels themselves, I also wanted to add channels next to every seam to accentuate the different angles of the seams of these stays. They were, after all, the main reason for me to choose this pattern. I later found out these were even easier to sew by putting the foot up against the seam. No need for pinning. To make sure that the cording pieces on one side of the stays are exactly the same as the other side of the stays, I think I've got a reasonably smart idea on how to do this. Because I flip it over, line up the pieces, and what I do next is I pin the stays together on one of the stitching lines. After that I flip it over and I can see the places where the pins are. I can just grab a piece of tailor's chalk and trace between all of the different pins. Then we can unpin it and complete the line, because before this the pins were in the way. And there we go, a line where we can sew. After finishing all the EL wire channels, we can snip off the seam allowances and cover them up. With the way the mesh feels, it needs to be finished really well. The plastic will poke through quite a lot. For this, we can cut a band and hand stitch them over the seam allowances on both sides. And this is what it looks like with all the tape on. Pretty neat. The next step is to insert the busk, and for this we're going to cut an extra piece of fabric from the, well, actual back fabric that we're going to attach at the end and then flip over and then sew in place with the busk in between. I guess once I show it how I do it, it makes sense, but for that we need to measure how much we actually need, and I suppose that, well, 5 centimeters wide should be more than enough, and it should be 25 centimeters high. It will also be a rather tight fit at the top and the bottom with the busk, but considering we're going to use quite a lot of fabric to bind the edges anyway, I don't think this should be a problem. I think we have a millimeter of fabric left over at both the bottom and the top, but we'll figure that out once it's in. So for now, let's cut some extra fabric and sew it on. To fully insert the busk, we pin the flap on the stays, keeping in mind to leave gaps for the hooks. I use red and green pins to see where I need to start and stop sewing. To insert the busk itself, we put it against the front with the hooks through the gaps. We can then flip the piece of fabric over and turn the busk so the hooks peek out at the front. And we stitch as close to the busk as possible to secure it in place, which in this case is right on top of one of the lines for the EL wire channels, so it has to be some careful sewing. After that, the end of the flap is turned over to hide the raw edge and stitched close to the edge. After attaching the flap on the other sides, before you can actually insert the busk part on the other side, we have to determine where the holes for all the pins are. The easiest way to do that, I think, is to just overlay this busk part on here, line it up correctly, and then we can determine, well, the exact location where we want the pins to be. And for the bottom hook, that means that it will be around here. The awl that I'm using is not a super sharp one because I'm trying to prick through the fabric and not damage it. And it should be visible from the other side. Right, there we go, that's better. And so this is the height where we want the pin to be. And now we can see if this hole is exactly in the middle of the location where we want the actual busk to be. Once we've determined the exact location, we can pull the awl through further to widen up the hole more. After making all of the holes for all of the pins, we can see if it matches up with the busk part. Insert the busk, then again flip the entire thing over, fold over the seam allowance, and then the other busk part should be in as well. So let's do that. A small oopsie, just after finishing recording I realized that these pins aren't in the middle of the busk but slightly off to the side, which means that my holes need to be slightly more towards the center seam than in the middle of the place where I want the busk. So I replaced them and this is what it looks like on the inside, which means that right now all we need to do is make these holes larger with the same awl and then we can push all the pins through. To finish inserting the busk with pins, we did the same as for the other side. Stitch once as close to the busk as possible, and one row of stitching to secure the seam allowance of the flap. And with that, we have created a working busk closure. The next step is to start thinking about how we want to close up the back. First I wanted to put in and boning and eyelets, but I realized I might not have enough space here for both of them, because I fitted it when it was pinned like this and it fits perfectly like this. So I might have made this cording channel be too close to the back. But anyway, I might put in just eyelets, because when I fitted just now this was already pretty straight, and hopefully with just the EL wire on both sides it should be straight enough. Anyway, let me just finish off these edges and put in the eyelets, which I also don't have yet, so let's just finish off the edges and put in the eyelets at some later point. Here we can do the same as the front. Attach the flap. Fold it over and turn the seam allowance to the inside before stitching it down. So with the back edges finished and pinned together, because I can't currently lace it yet because I don't have the eyelets yet, we can do a test fit, and I think this looks pretty good. I'm really happy with it. So we can start finishing off the top edge with the, well, almost making it into a tank top with scuba fabric. But for that I first want to get rid of these flaps because they are not positioned right for me. So I think I'm just going to, let's see, I think something like that would be perfect. And there we go, the weird flaps are gone. Now let's see if we can finish that properly, and then we can attach the top part. With these bits cut off, we can now start to look at how we actually want to finish off these stays. And I want to add a piece on top and on the back to make the entire stays into a tank top sort of thing. So what did I do? I put on an actual tank top and just put on these stays over it, which will also start to give an impression on how the final thing will look, because this is actually the way that I intend to wear it, I guess, over a black tank top, and I must say I'm liking it. Now for the bit on how to actually make these pattern pieces, because I have absolutely no clue how to go about this. I think because I am going to use Scuba, which is an elastic fabric, I think I am just going to mark where the top of the stays are on this tank top, and then make a pattern piece the same size as this tank top. I think this is less stretchy than the Scuba that I'm going to use, so this should be a nice starting point. We can do the same for the back, and then afterwards we'll see how we can actually attach it to the stays. So that's up next, and well, yeah, this is starting to make me happy. Did you know designing your own costumes is hard? Basically, I've got 3 ideas on how to do, well, this, but they're clashing. So I'm going to explain all of them and use you guys as a way of rubber duck debugging my stays. Okay, so hear me out. We've got the idea to make a front and the back out of scuba fabric, attach that all together and wear it over a tank top. Problem 1. We have to be able to get in and out of the stays. Because the front and basically the back will be attached to each other with the scuba fabric, we do still need an idea how to get in and out of this. For that, I've got 2 ideas. First of all was to make a keyhole or a peekaboo spot here, so there is a slight gap that could be stretched. It would be closed at the top, but still that would give me a bit of stretch on the back and the front to wiggle in and out of the stays. Idea 2, which I just came up with and might actually work better, is to hide snaps at the back of the stays. So I can put on the stays like normal, put on the tank top as a, well, tank top, and then snap button them to the top. I will have to see if that's comfortable enough or that the snaps are going to be annoying. Still, I really like the idea of a peekaboo hole here at the top. I mean, this is going to be a semi-sexy costume and I think that adds quite a lot. However, for the comfortableness of being able to wear the stays, I did want to wear an entire tank top underneath. Which I just realized, if you wear the tank top underneath, you will... This is not going to make any sense. So either I should not wear a tank top underneath, or I should modify the tank top that you will have a gap there. The other option that I had was to use a zipper at the front and just make these two parts detachable so they could be attached to the stays. But I don't really think I like that. So I think best thing we can do is just make the tank top in the way that it's detachable. I will have to check for the snaps, but in the way that it's detachable, because I think that's the easiest to get in and out. And then we'll see later what we'll do about the peekaboo hole here. I think that's the way that we're going to go. And then we will make this out of a single piece, and then we can just use a piece of interfacing to finish this gap. So yeah, I usually do all of this stuff as I go, but that does mean that I occasionally have to do some pondering while I'm making it. You know what? Let's just finish off this ramble and start cutting the scuba. I also have plenty in case I mess up once. I should have more than enough to do it a few times more. I don't want to do that because of course wastage of fabric, but in case it is needed, it is possible. So let me just cut those two pieces and then we can at least try and wear it and see what it does. So, time to cut some fabric. Before we start looking at how to attach this to the stays, we can sew the shoulder seams together. We can then, with the help of the paper pattern, pin the scuba bit to the stays for a test fit. There we go, this is what it currently looks like with the top fabric pieces attached. I purposefully put it on over a blue tank top so you can see what is stays part and what isn't. Yeah, I think I quite like it. It looks pretty cool, doesn't it? Here in the back I see that it's a bit too loose, so we'll just make a seam there and I don't think that will be a problem. This also gives me the opportunity to see how wide I want the armholes to be, and I think I quite like this. I also noticed that I really have to cut it off a bit more here because it's really tight right now. So even if I do or do not want to put something over my shoulders, this needs to lower. But yeah, I think it makes me look rather wide, which is funny, but I quite like it. However, it is a really big black square right here. So I do think that making a small keyhole here will add a bit, but we'll see about that. I guess that is a case of I'll just have to cut it in and we'll see. There we go with a small keyhole cut out. I did mangle my tank top a bit by pulling it down as far as I could so it wasn't just blue, but I don't know, it's just a nice little detail instead of it just being a solid black square. I kind of like it. I do think it might need to be a bit bigger, but I'll figure that out when I actually sew it, because this is still seam allowance of course as well. I just cut straight up and pulled it out a bit. Aside from that, I cut this neckline out a tiny bit further and right now it's perfect. I'll just leave it like this for now. The fabric doesn't fray, so it doesn't necessarily need to be finished right now. And I can do whatever I want with it once I decide if I want to do something for the shoulders or just work with half-length sleeves or something. And let's end it there. While editing, I realized this video was going to be very long because I've got about 2 hours of raw footage left and it's already at 20-something minutes. So you will get another part of making these Cyberpunk stays where we will actually insert the L wire. And I have actually finished the stays already, and I can tell you, they look amazing. So, I hope you stay around for the next part. and see you guys next time.